next month, we're going to launch the Nkukong Kitinkiti project. And so we're going to build processing plants in different parts of the country. So when we buy the chicks off you, we'll take them to the processing plants. We'll process the chickens and package them nicely, and then we'll supply them directly to the supermarkets. This will help us to cut our huge poultry import bill. We should be able to produce enough poultry to feed the whole of Ghana. We believe that in 3 years, we'll be producing almost 100% of the chicken that we eat in Ghana ourselves, so that we don't know how those chickens were raised. In many of the countries, they use genetically modified chickens. In many of the countries, they inject the chickens with hormones. We want fresh, Ghanaian grown chicken.
If you're like many Americans, you probably have some chicken thawing right now for dinner later tonight. And that mealtime staple is at the center of a global debate. President Trump has said he wants more countries to buy our meat and our poultry. But the European Union says U.S. chicken is washed in chlorine, may be unsafe, and they don't want it. So how do other countries process their poultry to prevent deadly foodborne illnesses? And is the United States method actually the best?
Imagine waking up in America, and suddenly the one country you never expected, Ghana, has just pulled the plug on a major U.S. trade pipeline. Not oil, not gold, not technology, but chicken, one of the most consumed foods in the entire United States, and in less than 24 hours. The shockwaves begin. In Georgia, Arkansas, and North Carolina, the heart of America's poultry belt, farmers are standing in front of their barns with their hands on their heads, wondering how millions of dollars of chicken prepared for export just became worth almost nothing. Export trucks are being rerouted, large poultry companies are issuing emergency statements, and Washington is in full panic mode. Because Ghana's sudden decision didn't just close a market, it opened a global question. Why is an African nation turning its back on one of America's biggest food industries? And more importantly, what does Ghana know that America doesn't? Inside Ghana, the narrative is completely different. Farmers are celebrating, local producers are cheering, ministers are saying enough. We will no longer allow foreign chicken to flood our markets while our own farmers suffer. But in the U.S., the tone is dark, alarming, and emotional. We're bleeding money, American poultry. Executives say, this could destroy us. Tonight, we break down the truth, the politics, the hidden negotiations, and the growing power shift between Africa and the United States, all triggered by something as simple and as powerful as chicken. The crisis began quietly, almost too quietly. A single announcement from Ghana's Ministry of Trade, delivered in a calm tone, but carrying enough weight to shake two continents. No dramatic press conference, no political fireworks, just a simple statement. Ghana's poultry import licenses from the United States will be suspended indefinitely. Within minutes, the news spread like wildfire online. To the average American, it might have sounded like a minor international decision. But to the heartland places, like Arkansas, Georgia, Alabama, and North Carolina, it was nothing short of an earthquake. If you walked into any American poultry town that morning, you would feel the tension before you even heard the conversations. Workers standing beside conveyor belts suddenly slowing down, managers staring into phones, farmers pacing around their barns with disbelief, because for the past 2 decades the United States had gotten comfortable, maybe too comfortable, sending tons of cheap frozen chicken into Ghana. It was routine, predictable, a guaranteed market. American farmers produced, Ghana imported, and the cycle went on untouched, until now, and the first reaction in America was panic. Not anger, not understanding, just pure panic. Poultry companies issued internal alerts, export trucks were halted, cold storage warehouses began filling up faster than they should. Millions of dollars worth of chicken, once destined for West Africa, suddenly had nowhere to go. As one American poultry executive told reporters, this isn't just a financial hit, this is bleeding. But while America was spiraling, the mood in Ghana was the complete opposite. For the first time in years, Ghanaian farmers felt something they hadn't felt in a very long time. Relief, hope, even pride. In towns like Dorma, Ahenkro, Sunyani, and Tamale, local poultry farmers started gathering around radios and televisions. Their reactions weren't quiet, there were cheers. There were tears. There were farmers lifting their hands to the sky thanking God. Because for decades, Ghana's poultry sector had been fighting a losing battle, not because they couldn't produce chicken, but because they couldn't compete with the sheer volume and low price of U.S. imports. The chicken coming from America was cheaper than what Ghanaian farmers could produce locally. Not because of quality differences, but because of America's industrial-scale massive farms, advanced technology, subsidized costs, and sophisticated processing plants. It was an uneven fight, a fight that slowly drained Ghana's poultry industry until many farms shut down, unable to survive. So when Ghana's government finally said, "We are prioritizing our farmers," it wasn't just policy, it was a liberation moment. But from America's perspective, the question became louder and louder. Why now? Why would Ghana walk away from such a long-standing trade relationship? The answer wasn't simple, and it went far deeper than chicken. In recent years, Ghana's economy has undergone major turbulence. Currency fluctuations, high import bills, rising food dependency, and inflation forced the government to rethink a crucial question. What does Ghana actually produce for itself? Poultry became a symbol of self-sufficiency, an industry Ghana once dominated in West Africa but lost due to foreign competition. So the cancellation wasn't just about trade, it was about reclaiming economic identity. Meanwhile, inside Washington, the tone shifted from confusion to fear. Advisors began briefing lawmakers. Trade lobbyists mobilized. Emergency meetings were held between U.S. poultry associations and officials. The White House requested detailed reports on what Ghana's decision meant for American farmers, supply chains, and export markets. What they discovered shocked them. Ghana wasn't just canceling a few shipments. The numbers revealed a massive financial impact. Tens of thousands of tons of American chicken were imported into Ghana each year. Without Ghana's demand, a sudden surplus formed, causing price drops. Farmers who were already operating at tight margins were suddenly staring at loss sheets that made no sense. Many American farmers weren't angry at Ghana, they were afraid of losing their livelihoods. One farmer from Arkansas said, "People think chicken is cheap, but raising it is not. We rely on export markets to survive. When one falls, the whole structure cracks." But if America looked shaken, what came next truly surprised them. Ghana didn't back down. Instead, Ghana doubled down. Leaders from the Ministry of Agriculture explained that the country was moving forward with a bold plan to rebuild its own poultry industry. The strategy was clear: give local farmers room to breathe, allow them to grow, invest in hatcheries, feed mills, and modern processing facilities, recreate a competitive landscape. For the first time in years, Ghana wanted to produce its own chicken, not rely on foreign supply. The United States didn't expect that level of determination, and behind closed doors, American trade representatives began searching for diplomatic ways to reverse the decision. Offers were quietly placed on the table, negotiations were attempted, compromises were suggested, but Ghana refused to yield. And then, the geopolitical angle emerged. Analysts noticed a pattern. Many African countries were rethinking long-standing trade dependencies. Some were turning toward local production. Others were building new partnerships with China, Brazil, or intra-African markets. The United States realized Ghana's move wasn't isolated, it was part of a wider shift. But something else was happening, to something America didn't fully understand. In Ghana, young entrepreneurs were entering the poultry business with modern ideas and passion. Local investors were injecting capital. Diaspora Ghanaians were returning with new knowledge, new machines, and new business models. Farmers were forming cooperatives. Agricultural universities were training a new generation of skilled professionals. It wasn't just a policy change, it was a movement fueled by national pride. Yet the U.S. poultry industry continued to struggle. Their financial reports grew darker. Export-dependent plants started cutting shifts. Some workers were warned of possible layoffs. For the first time in a long time, American farmers felt the sting of rejection from a market they assumed was guaranteed. But still, the debate grew louder. Was Ghana wrong for protecting its farmers? Or was America wrong for relying so heavily on exporting cheap chicken instead of fixing global price imbalances? Economists argued that Ghana was within its rights. American analysts argued that the decision would ripple into higher grocery prices in the U.S. and hurt farmers who fed the nation. Both sides had valid points, but beneath the headlines, something more complicated was happening, something not many people wanted to admit. For decades, Africa was treated as a marketplace, not a competitor. A destination for surplus goods, not a partner in equal economic exchange. But now, African countries were demanding something new: respect, balance, fairness, and sovereignty. And Ghana became the symbol of that shift. When news networks in America picked up the story, it became emotionally charged. Some commentators criticized Ghana, others blamed U.S. trade policy. Some simply warned viewers, this is the cost of losing influence in Africa. But in Ghana, the story was personal. Farmers who once struggled to sell a single crate of eggs were suddenly receiving phone calls from supermarkets. Poultry groups started holding meetings discussing expansion plans. Local hatcheries that had shut down years ago were being repaired. The youth saw new opportunity in agriculture, and the national mood shifted. Instead of depending on chicken imports, Ghana was preparing to become a producer again. But this raised a deeper question: could Ghana actually meet local demand? The skeptics said no, they pointed to infrastructure limitations, feed costs, and logistical gaps. But the believers argued yes, if the government followed through, if investors committed, if farmers united. And that is where the next chapter of the conflict began. American poultry lobbyists released a report estimating that the Ghana decision could cost the U.S. poultry industry hundreds of millions annually. They urged Washington to take action, diplomatic, economic, or strategic. They even warned other African markets might follow Ghana's example, creating a cascading effect. They weren't wrong. Nigeria was strengthening its local poultry sector. Kenya was pushing for food independence. South Africa already had strong local production. And across the continent, nations were questioning the impact of foreign imports on domestic industries. America suddenly realized the stakes were much higher than chicken. This was about influence, about future markets, about global positioning, about Africa's rising confidence. And that made the U.S. even more anxious. Meanwhile, Ghana remained firm. Government officials publicly defended the decision, stating that the country couldn't build a strong agricultural economy while allowing imports to dominate its markets. They emphasized that self-sufficiency wasn't just economic, it was national security. It was survival. But as tensions rose, something unexpected happened. Ordinary Americans began reacting emotionally. Videos of farmers losing income went viral. Interviews showing poultry workers afraid of losing their jobs stirred public sympathy. Some Americans even directed frustration toward Ghana, not understanding the deeper economic context. This created an online war of words between Americans and Ghanaians. Comments flooded social media. Arguments raged. Some accused the U.S. of flooding Africa with cheap goods. Others accused Ghana of abandoning a long-time trade partner. The debate grew global, intense, and emotional. But beneath it all, one fact remained. Ghana stood by its decision. Not because of politics, not because of pressure, but because of something deeper: dignity, the desire to build something real, something lasting, something Ghanaian. American farmers continued to plead with officials. The phrase "we're bleeding money" became the emotional headline repeated across multiple networks. It captured everything: loss, fear, uncertainty, and frustration. But the truth was even harder. The American poultry industry had grown so dependent on exporting cheap chicken that it had neglected to diversify. Ghana's move exposed a vulnerability that few people realized existed. Yet as the weeks passed, something remarkable happened. Ghanaian farmers began increasing production. New local poultry farms were registered. Community farming groups started forming. Feed mill investments rose. Financial institutions began offering agricultural loans. Youth organizations started pushing poultry as a profitable business. Ghana was building something from the ground up. And that was exactly what America feared: not the loss of chicken sales, but the rise of African countries saying no to dependency. As pressure grew, U.S. diplomats continued quietly approaching Ghanaian officials, hoping for a change in policy. But Ghana remained immovable, and American industry leaders realized the only way forward was to find new markets or fix domestic inefficiencies. But the story didn't end with tension. It evolved into a harsh truth for America and a powerful turning point for Ghana. The cancellation forced the U.S. to question its assumptions about global markets. It forced American farmers to confront the vulnerability of relying on foreign buyers. It forced policymakers to reconsider how they treated African markets, and it forced businesses to rethink strategy. For Ghana, the cancellation became a symbol of national pride and a call to rebuild domestic food production. And as the world watched, it became clear that this wasn't just a trade story. It was a story about sovereignty, a story about power, a story about economic identity, a story about a small nation standing up to a giant and winning not by aggression but by simply saying, "It's time to put our people first." Because in the end, this entire conflict wasn't about chicken at all. It was about who controls the narrative, who controls the market, who controls the future. And for the first time in a long time, Ghana showed the world that it would no longer play its old role. It was choosing a new path, one defined by self-sufficiency, confidence, and the courage to say no, even when it made global powers uncomfortable. A single decision triggered a crisis in America, a celebration in Ghana, and a global debate that is still unfolding. But one thing is clear: the world is shifting, influence is changing, and Ghana's bold move is now being studied by other nations searching for the same freedom. Because sometimes the smallest decision, like canceling a chicken import, can send the loudest message, and Ghana's message was heard everywhere, in the end. This story was never just about trade, it was never just about poultry. And it was never just about two countries sitting on opposite sides of the ocean. It was about something far deeper, something emotional, something human. Because when Ghana took this step, when Ghana said, "We will no longer allow cheap foreign imports to crush our farmers," it wasn't just a policy decision. It was a moment of courage, a declaration that small nations too have a voice. That they can choose their own path even when the cost is high, even when the world is watching. And somewhere in America, a farmer was standing in his barn, staring at thousands of birds that were supposed to be shipped to a country he'd never visited. He wasn't angry at Ghana. He wasn't thinking about geopolitics. He was thinking about survival. He was thinking about his family, his employees, his debts, his dreams built on the belief that export markets would always be there. On the other side of the ocean, a Ghanaian farmer stood in the sun, wiping sweat from his forehead. His farm was small, his equipment was old, but for the first time in a long time he felt hope. He felt seen. He felt like his country was finally fighting for him, protecting him, giving him a chance at a future where his children wouldn't have to abandon farming to survive. Two farmers, two lives, two realities connected by one single decision. And that's the emotional truth behind this story. When nations collide, it's not presidents who feel the pain first, it's the ordinary people, the workers, the small business owners, the farmers who wake up at a.m., the families who depend on the land for their livelihood, the communities built around barns, fields, and factories. The world often forgets that geopolitics is not about governments, it's about people who never appear in the headlines. But this time they did. This time the world saw the fear in American farmers' eyes and the pride in Ghanaian farmers' smiles. This time the world saw how the decision of one African nation could create ripples powerful enough to shake boardrooms and governments across the Atlantic. And in those ripples, a new reality emerged. Africa is no longer silent. Africa is no longer waiting for permission. Africa is no longer accepting roles assigned by global powers. Countries like Ghana are rewriting the script. They are choosing to produce, choosing to stand tall, choosing to break cycles of dependency that have lasted for decades. And in doing so, they are inspiring other nations across the continent. But this shift comes with consequences, real consequences, jobs lost, markets disrupted, countries forced to rethink strategies built over years, and emotions running high on both sides. Because when a decision creates winners and losers, someone will always feel the sting, yet beneath every economic statistic, beneath every export report, beneath every diplomatic statement, there are always human faces, and those faces tell a story more powerful than any headline. A story of resilience, a story of struggle, a story of communities trying to survive in a world that changes faster than they can adapt. Maybe that's why this story touched so many people, because it wasn't just Ghana vs America. It was the battle between two truths, both honest, both painful, both valid. One truth said, we need these exports to survive. The other truth said, we need to protect our farmers from collapsing. Two truths, two nations, two realities. And somewhere in that collision, the world learned a lesson it had ignored for too long. When Africa acts, when Africa decides, when Africa stands firm, the world must pay attention. Because Ghana's decision wasn't just about chicken. It was about identity. It was about dignity. It was about choosing a future where local voices mattered as much as foreign dollars. And tonight, as we close this story, remember this. History doesn't change when big countries make big announcements. History changes when ordinary people, farmers, workers, families find the courage to demand better. Ghana demanded better, and whether the world agrees or disagrees, that courage will be remembered forever.